Good morning. As Pastor Nathan said, I'm Pastor Jeff Clater. Pastor Nathan is sick of me because we have been traveling together for the last 3 days. We got back last night from a student missions conference at Concordia University in St. Paul. Ariana is with us this morning too. She went there. We hung out with 200 college students for like 3 or 4 days, and I am exhausted. I cannot live that life. I had my own hotel room. I didn't even have to stay up and chaperone college students, but I am exhausted. But it was awesome, and we got to see kind of the energy in the church from across the country. Every pastor has deficiencies. I have my own. One of my deficiencies is a reluctance to talk about money in the church. I'm sensitive to ways that the church has abused talk about money. I'm sensitive to the televangelists who have profited off the gospel. I'm sensitive to all of kind of the money talk in the church. And as a result, sometimes I don't talk about it as clearly or as focused as I should as a pastor, even though money is something that's clearly exhibited in Scripture, things that Jesus talked about most certainly. But I tend to sort of skirt around it. So I apologize for that. As a result, there may be people or even a generation in our church that doesn't fully understand a biblical view of generosity or of stewardship. So that's a deficiency that I have as a pastor. So today we're going to talk about money. Pastor Nathan's like, hey, you have to come have the dad talk with everybody. You got to be the dad. All right, we'll do that. There are faithful generations in our church. I see this outside of our church too. In general, in the church, there's a generation of people who just knew what it was to give to the church. So they're just like, yeah, we tithe. We give 10% of all that we have to God. It's just what we do without even thinking. There's a generation that just does that. There are people in our church who give half of their annual income to our ministry as an offering. I mean, it's just unreal. There are people in our church who will forfeit a vacation because they're like, I give to my church first, and then the leftovers down here, I really can't go on that trip that I wanted to. We have people in our church that hold off buying a new car because they're like, well, that's a lower priority. There's a senior member of our church, and I asked her, I was like, man, you are so generous. Why are you so generous? And she had this line, and it might sound kind of hokey, but it's just, she really believes it. It's so true. She says, you can't outgive the Lord. And it's proven true in her life. You might think that's sort of a cheesy bumper sticker, but it's actually true in her life. It's absolutely true. So she's incredibly generous, and God keeps being generous to her. It's just a true thing. So today we're going to talk about money, and I'm going to talk about why you should give and be generous. I'm going to give 4 reasons. Before I do that, first, a couple of preface words. I'm going to talk specifically about money. Because I know sometimes people will say, well, Pastor Jeff, I don't have a lot of money, but I have time. I'm going to be generous with my time, or I'm generous with my service. And that's awesome. Do that. Be generous with your time. I'm going to talk specifically about being generous with your money for 2 reasons. 1, the Bible does. And 2, generosity of money strikes at the heart a little more closely. It pinches a little bit more than just being generous with your time. I think sometimes we say, well, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm going to be generous with my time, and that's like a cop-out for not giving. So I'm just going to talk about money. So you can apply it to all kinds of other stuff, time or possessions or your house. You can be generous with a lot of things. I'm going to talk about money. Second, I want to recognize a variety of life stages here today. Some of you are kids, you're listening, youth. You're like, I don't have any money. Mom and dad don't even give me allowance, so I have nothing to give. Well, talk to your mom and dad then, okay? Some of you are students, and you're like, I don't have a full-time job, I'm in debt, okay? And that's understandable. So I'm not talking about amount of money, but I'm talking about just a spiritual habit of generosity with money, no matter what stage of life you're in. Because here's the reality. If you don't know how to be generous with money when you're 18 and you don't have it, then you won't be generous when you're 28 or 38 or 48. So again, it's sort of like a cop-out to say, well, I'll give when I have a full-time job. I'll give when I'm 30 and I'm established. I'll give when, But then the bar is always moving. And you get to that stage and you're like, well, I still have to get here. And so I'll give when I have enough. Well, then you never will. So you can't be generous with a lot if you first haven't been generous with a little. So today, even if you have a little, we're talking about generosity, a spirit of selfless giving, even when you have a little. Okay, so 4 reasons why we give, why we are generous, specifically with our money and the church. Number 1, all right, Dex, you're up, buddy. Number 1, giving is tied to your heart. Jesus said so. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There is this tie between our resources and the heart. I can tell a lot about you. You could tell a lot about somebody if you look at their budget, or maybe even more accurately, their spending. You can tell a lot about what priorities are, what their heart is. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So giving is tied to your heart. So as your pastors, we actually care about your heart. We don't want anything from you, we want for you. So I hope you hear, if it's Pastor Nathan or me, if we talk about money, it's not like we want more stuff for our church, or we're just trying to hustle our salaries. Okay, we trust that God's going to provide it, and if he ever doesn't, then we'll just go get a real job and do something else. But first and foremost, we care about your heart. So we're going to speak to issues that touch your heart. And this is one of them when we talk about money. Sacrificial giving, it's an act of worship, it's an act of faith. Dex, if you go to Proverbs 3:9, you've heard about in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, about first fruits giving. So why don't you read this with me? Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. So maybe you know of first fruits giving. If you don't, first fruits is exactly what it says. So in an agricultural society, you harvest the fruit of the land, a crop, and you're giving the first of it. Literally, they would give the first of it to the priest as an offering to God. Now, it's really important that it's that word first fruits. So what they did is they took the first of the fruit of the land, and they gave it to God. That's important because they wouldn't know what would come after that. They might give the first crop, and then who knows, drought could come, a flood, pests could come, hail could come, and they wouldn't know what would happen. It would be the opposite if you would say, well, God, I'm going to harvest everything first. I'm going to make sure that the barns are full, and then at the end of harvest season, if there's some leftovers, I'm going to give it to you. That would be like last fruits, I guess you'd call that. But the Bible's very clear, like first fruits, it's an act of faith to say, God, I'm going to give you first, and I don't even know what's going to come tomorrow. But I'm going to trust I'm going to be okay. So actually giving your resources first, it's an act of faith. Do I really trust God to provide when I don't know what tomorrow will bring? By the way, Jesus taught us to pray that way. Daily bread. So in daily bread, you're not praying for annual bread. You're not praying for retirement bread. You're praying for enough for today. And then tomorrow, you pray the same prayer and you say, there'll be enough for tomorrow. And then the next day, there'll be enough for the next day. So it's daily bread. So first fruits. So the church is not a charity. We don't need your donations. We want your heart because God wants your heart. So first and foremost, giving, generosity it's an issue of the heart. All right, Dex, next one. Giving is an antidote to greed. If you want to kill greed, then give. It'll cut away at that greed that sort of wrapped around your heart. Our sinful souls are bent towards self, bent toward self first, looking out for yourself before others. So greed is a tendency for all of us. But to give money away, it pinches a little bit. So if you write a check for an offering, or if you push that button and you look at the amount, and if it feels like a little bit, you feel a little bit of tension, if it feels a little bit painful, that's exactly what should happen. because it is a sacrificial gift. You're pushing against that tendency toward greed. Financial prudence, to be frugal, it's a good thing. Like, be frugal, be prudent. But there's a line when you start to hoard, and hoarding actually hurts your soul. It's actually detrimental. To be stingy is a liability. To be stingy actually degrades you, a lack of generosity. It's a symptom of a fearful heart. So to be stingy will say, God, I'll give to you when I have enough, or if I have enough. That statement on its own exhibits sort of a lack of faith that there will be enough. And so the only way to really push back against like the greed, a sermon might not do it. So I'm preaching today, you might be like, yeah, that's fine, Pastor Jeff. It may have like this much effectiveness. The best way to push back against greed is actually to like pull your wallet out and just be like, there, I'm just gonna do it. To be obedient to it. It hurts a little bit, but it's the antidote to greed. Here's a quote from George MacDonald. George MacDonald, he was like the inspiration for C.S. Lewis. George says, "Is it not time that I lost a few things when I care for them so unreasonably? The losing of things is the mercy of God. It comes to teach us to let them go." So if it hurts a little bit to lose something, to give something away, then it's good. That's the mercy of God. It comes to teach us to let them go. Maybe you've been unreasonably obsessed with something and you have to let it go. So first, giving is tied to your heart. Second, giving is an antidote to greed. All right, next, giving is an investment in ministry. So I always say this to like our new member class. I say, when you give, if you give an offering, like in the Old Testament, if you give a first fruits or you bring an animal to sacrifice, they would literally burn it, right? Just, it's gone. So you could give your offering to our church and we could just, like if it's cash or checks, we could burn it. If it's digital currency or Bitcoin, we could just like delete it. I don't know if you can do that, but delete it. It could just go away and it would still fulfill the purpose of the heart, of a sacrificial gift. We could do that. I want you to know we don't do that, okay? We actually employ resources for ministry. So